A rich man pretends to be a poor bus driver to find a wife. Henry, my boy, the empire is yours, but it needs a queen, his father said, his voice echoing with the weight of generations of wealth. You promised me that once you took over the transit division, you'd finally settle down. Henry chuckled, leaning back in a chair that cost more than most people made in a year. Give me time, Dad. I want someone who sees me, not just the sterling name. I've already made it easy for you, his father countered, sliding 2 dossiers across the mahogany desk. 2 women, both high-level executives in our logistics arm. Ivy League educated, brilliant, and from families that understand our world. Either would be a perfect match. Henry glanced at the photos of the polished socialites and felt a familiar coldness. So you've already picked out a bride? That was fast. I'm not picking, I'm providing options, his father laughed. But remember, a man in your position doesn't have the luxury of wandering the streets looking for the one. As Henry left the office, his father's words stuck in his throat like ash. Luxury of wandering the streets. A rebellious, desperate idea began to take shape. If he went in as the heir, he'd only find another shadow of himself. What if I don't go in as the heir? He whispered to the empty elevator. What if I'm just a man behind a wheel? A driver for the very lines we own. He smiled, a genuine spark of excitement hitting him for the first time in years. To find a heart that wasn't for sale, he had to become a man who had nothing to buy it with. He would trade the silk tie for a tattered cap and the corner office for a driver's seat. Only then would he know who truly loved the man, and not the crown. Before we get into the main story, let me know in the comment section where you are watching from. Subscribe and share because I have more interesting stories to share with you. Henry stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of his penthouse suite, barely recognizing the man looking back. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a stained undershirt and work pants that smelled faintly of diesel and sweat. He'd bought them from a thrift store 3 blocks from his tower, paying cash so no one would trace the purchase back to Harrison Sterling's only son. The tattered driver's cap completed the transformation. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, a man who worked with his hands because he had no other choice. His father's voice echoed in his mind from their last argument. They love the crown, Henry, never the man. Every woman at that gala smiled at your bank account, not your face. Henry had stormed out that night, sick of champagne toasts and calculated flirtations, sick of wondering if anyone would care about him if the money disappeared tomorrow. That's when the idea took root. What if it did disappear? What if he became nobody? The morning air in the Riverside district tasted like exhaust and yesterday's rain. Henry pulled bus 47 into the first stop of Route 12, the city's longest and most neglected line, and cut the engine. The bus coughed one last protest before falling silent. Through the grimy windshield, he watched the neighborhood wake up. Street vendors setting up carts, workers trudging toward factory shifts, mothers herding children toward schools that had seen better decades. This was a world Henry's wealth had insulated him from his entire life. His father owned half the real estate downtown, but here, no one knew his name or cared about his stock portfolio. The doors hissed open at his first stop. An elderly man climbed aboard, dropping exact change into the fare box without looking at Henry's face. Anonymous. Forgettable. Exactly what Henry needed. Then Clara stepped onto the bus. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, magazine cover way of the women at his father's galas. She was beautiful the way morning light through dirty windows was beautiful, unexpected and real. Her nurse's scrubs were wrinkled from a long shift, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and when she smiled at him, actually smiled, like he was a person worth acknowledging, Henry felt something crack open in his chest. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Her fare card beeped red. Insufficient funds. Clara's face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh God, I'm sorry. I thought I loaded it yesterday. I can get off and," Henry found himself saying, "system's been glitchy all morning. Go ahead and sit." It was against policy, a policy he'd written himself during a board meeting he'd barely paid attention to. But Clara's grateful smile made him forget every regulation he'd ever signed. She took a seat near the front, and Henry drove with more care than he'd ever driven his Aston Martin. 3 stops later, trouble boarded. A group of college kids stumbled on, reeking of last night's party. The ringleader took one look at Bus 47 and laughed. Jesus, what is this, the Poverty Express? This thing even has seat belts. His friends howled. Henry's hands tightened on the wheel. Hey driver, you know this bus is a death trap, right? You should be embarrassed. Henry kept his eyes on the road. It gets people where they need to go. Barely. Bet you make, what, minimum wage? That's sad, man. Before Henry could respond, Clara stood up. Not dramatically, not loudly. She just stood and spoke with quiet authority. That's enough. This man is doing his job. He got you on this bus safely, and he'll get you off safely. If you don't like it, there's a door. The kid blinked, surprised, then muttered something and slumped into a seat. When Clara's stop came, she paused at the door. Don't listen to them, she said quietly. What you do matters. Getting people to work, to hospitals, to their families, that's important. She stepped off before Henry could respond, disappearing into the morning crowd. He sat there, engine idling, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. In that moment, Henry realized something profound. He'd spent his entire life surrounded by people who'd never defended him the way Clara just had, because they loved his money too much to risk it. But Clara had defended a man she thought earned $8 an hour. She'd seen him, not his portfolio, not his properties, just him. As Henry pulled back into traffic, his hands steady on the worn steering wheel, he felt something he'd never experienced in boardrooms or penthouses. Peace. The kind that comes from being valued for what you do, not what you own. He'd found it in the dirt, this thing that eluded him in all the gold. And he'd found her, the woman who made him feel like a man instead of a balance sheet. He just had to figure out how to keep her without the truth destroying everything. Clara became a regular on the 6:15 route. Every evening after her shift at Riverside Community Clinic, she'd board Bus 47 with that same warm smile, the one that made Henry's carefully constructed persona feel like tissue paper. By the 3rd week, they'd graduated from polite nods to actual conversation. She'd tell him about difficult patients and medication shortages. He'd tell her carefully edited stories about other passengers, never mentioning that he owned the company that employed him. It was the most honest dishonesty of his life. On a Thursday that felt like any other, Clara boarded with 2 paper bags that smelled like heaven. I hope this isn't weird, she said, settling into her usual seat, but I bought too much food from the taco truck, and I hate eating alone. Henry glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You asking me to have dinner with you? I'm asking if you've eaten today. You look like you forget to sometimes. She wasn't wrong. He'd been so focused on maintaining his double life that he'd skipped lunch to attend an emergency board meeting, then raced back to the depot still wearing his suit under his work clothes. I could eat, Henry admitted. He pulled into the depot lot at the end of his shift and killed the engine. The other drivers had already left, leaving Bus 47 sitting alone under the flickering parking lot lights. Clara moved to the seat directly behind him, spreading out their feast, 2 tacos each, rice and beans, and 2 glass bottles of Mexican Coke. The total cost was probably $4. Henry had dropped more than that on a single espresso that morning. This is probably the best meal I've had all week, Henry said, and meant it. The taco was simple, carne asada, cilantro, onions, lime, but it tasted like something real, something earned. Clara laughed. Better than what? The gourmet ramen you can afford on a driver's salary. Hey, I'll have you know my ramen is top tier. I add an egg sometimes. Living large. She took a bite of her taco, a spot of salsa catching on her bottom lip. Henry had to look away before he did something stupid like lean over and kiss it off. Can I ask you something? Clara said. Why this job? You're smart. You could probably do something that pays better. Henry chose his words carefully. Maybe I'm not looking for better money. Maybe I'm looking for something that matters. Does driving a bus matter to you? Getting you home safely every night?
Yeah.
That matters. Clara's cheeks flushed, and she focused intently on her food. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind Henry never experienced at business dinners where every pause was a negotiation. This was just two people sharing a meal in a beat-up bus, and it was perfect. Then headlights flooded through the windows, bright, synchronized, moving in formation. Henry's stomach dropped. He knew those vehicles. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled past the depot, maintaining the precise spacing his security team used when transporting him. Marcus was in the lead vehicle. Henry could see his head of security's profile through the windshield, probably wondering why the boss hadn't checked in. Henry ducked his head, pretending to dig through the paper bag for napkins. "Whoa," Clara said, watching the motorcade. "Must be someone important. Politicians, maybe." "Probably," Henry managed, his heart hammering. The SUVs slowed at the depot entrance, and for one terrible moment, he thought Marcus had spotted him. The lead vehicle's brake lights flared. Henry held his breath. Then they drove on, disappearing into traffic.
You okay?
Clara asked.
You look pale.
Just realized I forgot to clock out. Hold on. Henry practically leaped from his seat, busying himself with the bus's dated timekeeping system while his pulse slowly returned to normal. When he came back, Clara had cleaned up their dinner, folding the paper bags with careful precision. "Thank you for eating with me," she said softly. "I know it's probably weird, having dinner on a bus with a passenger." "It's not weird," Henry interrupted. "It's the best part of my day." Clara smiled, the kind of smile that made him forget about security details and secret identities and all the ways this could go wrong. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Same time tomorrow?" "I'll be here," Henry said, watching her disappear into the evening. He slumped back in the driver's seat, exhaling hard. A $4 dinner on a bus, hiding from his own security team like a fugitive. This was insane. His father would have him committed if he knew. But as Henry locked up Bus 47 and walked to the battered Honda he'd bought for his cover story, he couldn't stop smiling. He'd spent $200,000 on a charity gala last month and felt nothing. He'd spent $2 on tacos with Clara and felt like the richest man alive. The math didn't make sense. But for the first time in his life, Henry didn't care about the numbers. Clara boarded the bus with tears streaming down her face. Not the quiet, dignified kind, the raw, angry kind that came from watching your world collapse in real time. Henry nearly drove through a red light when he saw her. "What happened?" he asked, forgetting protocol, forgetting passengers, forgetting everything except the woman crumbling into the seat behind him. She thrust a paper at him, her hands shaking. "They're tearing it down. The clinic. Victor Sterling, some corporate shark from Sterling Transit Holdings. He's demolishing the whole block for a new transit hub." Henry's blood turned to ice. The paper was official, stamped with his own company's logo. Demolition notice. Riverside Community Clinic. 30 days to vacate. His cousin's signature sprawled across the bottom like a victory declaration. Henry's phone buzzed in his pocket, his real phone, the one he kept on silent during shifts. He didn't need to check it to know what it said. Emergency board meeting. Victor making moves. He looked at Clara in the mirror, at her red eyes and clenched fists, and felt something crack inside his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, the words pathetically inadequate. "That clinic serves 3,000 people. Diabetics, cancer patients, kids who can't afford anywhere else. And they're just erasing it for profit." She laughed bitterly. "You know what the notice says. Sterling Transit Holdings is committed to community development." Community development. Like we're not a community already. Henry's jaw tightened. Victor had always been ruthless, but this was personal. His cousin knew about the clinic's importance. They discussed it in meetings Henry barely paid attention to, back when neighborhoods were just data points on spreadsheets. He'd abstained from the vote, too detached to care. That abstention had just destroyed Clara's world. "There has to be something," Henry started. There's nothing. You think people like Victor Sterling listen to people like us? We're invisible to them. Just numbers to be cleared away. She wiped her eyes roughly. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. You've got your own problems. Henry's phone buzzed again. Then again. Marcus's personal line. This wasn't a request anymore. He pulled into Clara's stop, his mind racing. I have to go, Clara said quietly. Thank you for listening. She stepped off, shoulders bent under the weight of defeat, and Henry wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to say he'd fix it, that he owned the company, that Victor answered to him. But the words stuck in his throat because telling her meant admitting he'd been lying since the moment they met. He watched her disappear into the clinic, his company's demolition target, and felt like the worst kind of coward. Then he grabbed his phone and called Marcus. I need an emergency board meeting.
Now.
40 minutes later, Henry stood in the private elevator to Sterling Tower's executive floor, his driver's cap stuffed in his pocket, his undershirt replaced by a shirt and tie he kept in the office. His reflection in the polished steel looked like a stranger, the billionaire heir Victor expected, not the bus driver Clara trusted. The boardroom was full of sharks in suits. Victor sat at the far end, smug and comfortable, clearly expecting a rubber stamp on his community development project. He blinked when Henry walked in.
Henry. Didn't know you were back in town. I'm full of surprises.
Henry took his seat at the head of the table, the chair his father had occupied before retirement. Let's talk about Riverside. For the next 30 minutes, Henry dismantled Victor's proposal piece by piece. The numbers didn't justify demolition. The transit hub could be built 2 blocks over on empty industrial land. The PR nightmare of displacing a community clinic would cost more than the project saved. Victor's face went from smug to red to pale. You've never cared about routing decisions before, his cousin said tightly.
Why now?
Henry thought of Clara crying on his bus. Because I'm paying attention now. Motion to table the Riverside demolition indefinitely.
All in favor.
Every hand rose except Victor's. His cousin stared at him like he'd grown a second head, but Henry didn't care. He'd bought Clara's clinic 30 days. Maybe more if he played this right. Meeting adjourned. Henry was back in the elevator before Victor could corner him with questions. He changed in the parking garage, pulling his dirty undershirt back over his head, jamming the cap low over his eyes. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Marcus and 1 new message. Sir, where are you? Henry texted back. Personal business. I'm fine. Then he drove his beat-up Honda back to the depot, parked bus 47 in its usual spot, and sat there for a long moment. He'd just saved Clara's world without her knowing. The secret was safe. But as Henry locked up the bus and headed home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made everything infinitely more complicated. Because now he knew exactly what his money could do for her. And he knew she'd hate him for using it if she ever found out who he really was. Clara had invited him to the hospital fundraiser with an apologetic smile and low expectations. It's boring, she'd warned. Just doctors and donors pretending to care about poor people for 3 hours. But there's free food, and I could use a friend. Henry should have said no. Should have invented an excuse, claimed a shift conflict, anything to avoid a room full of people who might recognize him. But Clara had called him a friend, and that word in her mouth felt more valuable than every asset in his portfolio. So he'd said yes, then spent 2 days finding clothes that looked decent but not expensive. The result was a thrift store blazer that almost fit and khakis that had definitely seen better years. He looked exactly like a bus driver trying his best. Perfect. The hospital's event hall was all crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, the kind of place Henry had been to 100 times from the other side of the economic divide. Tonight, he entered through the side door with Clara, watching her tug self-consciously at her simple black dress. She looked beautiful. Everyone else looked expensive. There was a difference. They'd made it through half an hour of small talk and disappointing hors d'oeuvres when Dr. Raymond Vance found them. Clara's boss was exactly the type of man Henry had spent his life avoiding. Old money, older attitudes, and the kind of condescension that came from never questioning whether he deserved his position.
Clara, Vance said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here.
I know the ticket prices are a bit steep for clinic nurses.
Clara's jaw tightened.
I volunteer enough hours to qualify for a staff ticket, Dr. Vance.
Of course, of course. Vance's gaze slid to Henry like he was evaluating livestock. And who's this? This is Henry. He's a friend, Henry supplied, extending his hand. Vance's handshake was brief, dismissive. Henry. And what do you do, Henry? I drive a bus. The words landed like stones in water.
Vance's expression shifted through several stages: surprise, amusement, barely concealed disdain.
A bus. How essential. He drew out the word like it tasted bad. Route 12, Henry added, keeping his voice even. Riverside District. Ah, the rough route. Vance sipped his champagne. That must be quite the challenge. Though I suppose it doesn't require much ambition. Just showing up, really. Drive the same circle, day after day. Must be comfortable, in a way. No pressure to excel. Clara's face flushed. Dr. Vance, I'm just making conversation, Clara. No offense intended.
But offense was precisely what he intended, and they all knew it.
Henry seems content with his lot. Nothing wrong with that. The world needs people willing to accept their limitations. Henry had been insulted by better men than Raymond Vance. Corporate rivals who'd tried to dismantle his company. Competitors who'd questioned his strategies in boardrooms that shaped entire industries. But those insults came from people who saw him as a threat. Vance saw him as nothing, a curiosity, a charity case, something Clara had dragged in from the gutter. No offense taken, Henry said calmly, though his hands were clenched in his pockets. Vance's smile sharpened. You know, I passed your bus the other day. Route 12, that ancient rattletrap barely holding together. I'm amazed the city lets that thing operate. It's practically a safety hazard. You must be embarrassed driving something so obviously cheap. Henry felt Clara stiffen beside him. He could end this with 6 words. I own the company. Every bus, every route, every policy that kept Vance's Lexus from getting stuck in traffic. Henry signed off on it. He could make one call and have Vance's hospital donations audited, his tax shelters examined, his entire comfortable life scrutinized by people who didn't appreciate men who confused wealth with worth. But that would mean revealing himself. That would mean watching Clara's face change when she realized the poor bus driver she'd defended was actually the billionaire heir she'd railed against. That would mean losing the only real thing he'd ever had. The bus gets people where they need to go, Henry said quietly. That's all that matters. Vance laughed, actually laughed. Well, I suppose we all have our modest aspirations. Clara, do try the salmon. It's excellent. Your friend here probably isn't used to food this nice. He drifted away, leaving a wake of casual cruelty. Clara turned to Henry, her eyes bright with angry tears. I'm so sorry. He's a complete ass. You didn't deserve that. It's fine, Henry said, though it wasn't. Not because Vance had hurt his feelings. Men like that couldn't touch him. But because he'd stood there and taken it, and every word had driven home the lie he was living. He'd chosen this. Chosen to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be seen as less than by people who wouldn't last 5 minutes navigating the world he actually occupied. And the worst part, watching Clara defend him, again, made him feel like more of a fraud than Vance's insults ever could. It's not fine, Clara said fiercely. You're worth 10 of him. What you do matters, Henry. Don't let people like that make you forget it. Henry looked at her, this woman who believed he was exactly what he pretended to be, and felt the weight of his deception like a physical thing pressing on his chest. Thanks, he managed. I won't. But as they left the fundraiser early, Clara's hand briefly touching his arm in solidarity, Henry knew the truth. The real insult wasn't anything Vance had said. It was that Henry had built a relationship on a lie so complete that even kindness felt like betrayal. Henry had signed the check 3 days ago in the back of Bus 47 during his lunch break, his hand cramping around a pen that cost more than most people's monthly rent. $5 million. Enough to keep Riverside Community Clinic running for years, to upgrade equipment, to hire more staff, to become the kind of place that couldn't be casually erased by men like Victor. He'd routed it through his family's foundation with explicit instructions: anonymous donor, no press releases, no plaques with his name. Just money appearing where it was desperately needed, like rain after a drought. Marcus had asked questions Henry refused to answer. His accountant had raised concerns about the optics. Henry had signed it anyway, then shoved the paperwork into his glove compartment and tried not to think about what it meant that he was secretly funding the life of a woman who thought he could barely afford his own lunch. Clara exploded onto the bus like a firework, her face incandescent with joy. "Henry! Oh my God, Henry, you won't believe what happened." She didn't wait for the bus to stop, didn't care that there were other passengers watching. She just launched herself at him, throwing her arms around his shoulders from behind the driver's seat in a hug that nearly made him drive into a mailbox. "Whoa, hey!" "What?" Henry laughed despite himself, steadying the wheel. "What's going on?" "The clinic. We got a donation. An anonymous donation. $5 million, Henry. $5 million. She was crying and laughing simultaneously, her breath hot against his ear. "We're saved. The whole clinic, all the patients, everything. We're actually going to make it." Henry's chest constricted. He forced his voice to stay steady, casual, appropriately surprised. "That's incredible. Who would donate that much?" "No one knows. It came through some foundation, completely anonymous. The director spent all morning trying to find out who it was, but they wouldn't say. Someone just decided we were worth saving." Clara finally released him, dropping into her usual seat, vibrating with barely contained energy. "I've been calling everyone. My mom cried. Dr. Patel cried. Even Mrs. Rodriguez from billing cried, and I've never seen that woman show emotion." Henry pulled into his next stop, his hands steady on the wheel even though his heart was hammering. This was what he'd wanted: Clara happy, the clinic saved, good done without expectation of recognition or reward. So why did he feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff? "You must have some idea who it was," he said carefully. "Someone local? A former patient?" Clara shook her head, her ponytail whipping back and forth. "That's the thing. The foundation is national, elite level. The kind of people who fund museums and symphonies, not little neighborhood clinics. Whoever did this doesn't need publicity. They just wanted to help." She leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Can you imagine having that much money and using it like this? Not for a building with your name on it or a tax write-off, just because it was right." Henry thought about the museums and symphonies that did bear his name, the galas he'd attended where donors competed to outspend each other. He'd written bigger checks than this one for causes he couldn't remember, organizations he'd never visited. This was the first time his money had felt like it actually mattered. "Must be nice," he said, "being able to do something that big." "You do something big every day," Clara said fiercely. "You get people to work, to doctors, to their families. You think that's small? Mrs. Kim takes your bus to dialysis 3 times a week. That teenage kid with the cast, you're how he gets to physical therapy. You matter, Henry. Maybe not $5 million matter, but real life, everyday matter. That counts." The words landed like punches. Henry gripped the steering wheel harder, staring at the road ahead because looking at Clara would shatter something inside him. She saw poetry in his disguise, nobility in his lie. She'd built him into someone honorable, someone genuine, someone real. And he was signing checks in the back of his bus, playing God with money he'd done nothing to earn except be born into the right family. "We should celebrate," Clara said suddenly. "Nothing fancy. Maybe that taco truck again. My treat this time." Henry found his voice somewhere beneath the guilt. "Yeah, That sounds perfect. That evening, they sat in the depot again, sharing $4 tacos while Clara talked about the clinic's plans, new equipment, expanded hours, maybe even a dental program. She painted futures with her hands, sketching possibilities in the air, and Henry watched her create hope from his money without knowing it came from him. When she left, she hugged him again at the door of the bus. Thank you for listening. I know this is probably boring for you. It's not boring, Henry said and meant it. He watched her walk away, then sat alone in bus 47 as the parking lot lights flickered on. $5 million had bought Clara's joy, the clinic's survival, and countless patients' futures. But sitting there in the gathering dark, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just purchased something else entirely. Another layer of lies between himself and the only person who'd ever made him feel like someone worth knowing. The check had cleared that morning. The distance between who he was and who she thought he was had never felt wider. Henry realized his mistake the moment Clara held up the watch, dangling it from her fingers like a question he couldn't answer. He'd been careless 3 nights ago, rushing to change from his suit into his driver's clothes in the back of the bus before his shift. The Patek Philippe, a gift from his father on his 25th birthday, worth more than most people earned in 2 years, had slipped from his pocket and vanished under the seats. He'd meant to retrieve it, but then Clara had boarded with news about a patient who'd recovered, and he'd forgotten about everything except her smile. Now she stood in the aisle, turning the watch over in her hands, studying it with the careful attention she gave to everything. I found this under seat 14, she said. Someone must have dropped it. Henry's mouth went dry. The watch was platinum and sapphire crystal, its face inscribed with complications most people couldn't even name. The band alone cost more than bus 47. Even covered in depot grime, it screamed wealth. Probably just lost and found stuff, Henry said, forcing casualness into his voice. I can take it, turn it in at the depot office. Clara moved closer, holding it up to the light. Henry, this looks expensive. Like, really expensive. Look at the detail on the face. She squinted at the inscription. Is that French? It's a knockoff, Henry said quickly. Too quickly. Street vendor special. You can get them in Chinatown for $20. They make them look real. Clara's eyebrows rose. $20. This has weight to it. And these stones, cubic zirconia, glass, whatever they use for fakes. Henry reached for it, but Clara pulled back, still examining it. His heart hammered against his ribs. One Google search. That's all it would take. One photo, one reverse image search, and she'd know exactly what she was holding. She'd know someone who could afford a 6-figure watch had been on his bus, or worse, she'd start asking questions about how a knockoff could look this authentic. I'm pretty sure this is real, Clara said slowly. Henry, if someone lost this, they're probably desperate to find it. This could be worth. It's fake, Henry interrupted, hating the edge in his voice. Trust me. I've seen enough knockoffs to know. Rich people don't ride the Route 12 bus. Clara studied him for a long moment, and Henry felt naked under her gaze. Then she laughed, shaking her head. You're right. I'm being paranoid. Too many crime shows, I guess. I just got excited thinking we could help someone. She handed him the watch, and Henry's fingers closed around it, the metal warm from her touch. The inscription on the back burned against his palm. To Henry, may time always be on your side. Dad. I'll turn it in, Henry said. If anyone claims it, they can have their fancy fake back. You're a good guy, you know that? Clara settled into her seat. Most people would just keep it. That night, Henry sat in his penthouse, turning the watch over in his hands. He should have been more careful. Should have left everything from his real life locked away where it couldn't contaminate the fiction he'd built. But he'd gotten comfortable, started treating the bus like a second home instead of a stage. Marcus had called it operational security failure. Henry called it something else, getting in too deep. He fastened the watch around his wrist, feeling its familiar weight. In 3 days, he'd wear this to a board meeting where they'd discuss quarterly earnings that could fund 100 clinics. Then he'd take it off, shove it in his glove compartment, and become the man who drove a bus for $8.50 an hour. The man Clara thought was good. The man who existed only in lies. His phone buzzed. A text from Clara. Thanks for listening today. You make the hard days easier. Henry stared at the message, then at the watch, then at the city spreading out beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a man who owned buildings and controlled transit systems and signed checks with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. But he couldn't own the truth. Couldn't control what would happen when Clara learned that the knockoff watch was worth more than her annual salary, that the humble bus driver was the billionaire heir she'd spent weeks complaining about, that every moment between them was built on a foundation of calculated deception. The watch ticked steadily on his wrist, counting down toward an ending Henry couldn't see but could feel approaching like a collision in slow motion. He typed back, "Anytime." Then he sat in the dark, watching the city lights blur through windows that cost more than the bus he pretended to drive, wondering when the difference between who he was and who he pretended to be had become the only thing that felt real. The invitation arrived on Sterling Transit Holdings letterhead, embossed and pretentious. Victor's handwriting scrawled across the bottom, "Emergency board vote on Riverside project. Attendance mandatory. Black tie." Henry crumpled it in his fist, knowing exactly what his cousin was doing. Victor had been circling since the last meeting, gathering votes, building alliances. He was coming for the clinic again, and this time he'd stacked the deck. Henry could show up as himself, the billionaire heir with voting power, and block it again. Or he could watch everything Clara loved get bulldozed because he was too committed to a lie. The choice should have been simple. It wasn't. "I need to ask you something weird," Henry said when Clara boarded that evening. She immediately looked concerned. "Are you okay? You look stressed. There's a gala at the Grandview Hotel tomorrow night. The Sterling Transit Holdings annual thing. Big donors, board members, the usual rich people nonsense." He'd rehearsed this in his head a dozen times, and it still sounded insane. "I think we should crash it." Clara blinked. "Crash it? As in, sneak into a billionaire's party?" "They're going to finalize the demolition vote. I heard drivers talking about it at the depot. If we can get in, maybe we can make noise, get it in front of cameras, embarrass them into backing off." It was a terrible plan that made no sense unless you knew he was supposed to be at that gala. Clara should have said no. Should have pointed out the dozen ways this could go wrong. Instead, her eyes lit up with something fierce. "When do we leave?" Henry had borrowed server uniforms from a catering company he secretly owned. Black vest, white shirt, bow tie, the universal costume of the invisible. They entered through the service entrance, carrying empty trays like they belonged there. The Grandview ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that didn't apologize for existing. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, women in gowns that cost more than Henry's bus. He'd been to 100 events like this. Never as a waiter. "Stay close," he murmured to Clara. "If anyone asks, we're with Platinum Catering." "I feel like I'm in a heist movie," Clara whispered back, barely containing a nervous laugh. "A really boring heist movie about corporate zoning." They circulated through the crowd, Henry keeping his head down, hyper-aware of every face. He recognized half the room, business partners, family friends, people who'd known him since childhood. Any of them could blow his cover with a casual, "Hello, Henry." Clara seemed oblivious to the danger, focused entirely on their mission. "There," she said suddenly, nodding toward the stage where Victor stood holding court with 3 board members. "That's him, right? Victor Sterling." Henry's jaw tightened. His cousin looked smug, champagne glass raised, already celebrating a victory he hadn't won yet. "That's him. He looks exactly like I imagined. Like someone who's never been told no in his entire life." Clara grabbed 2 champagne flutes from a passing tray, real staff, who gave them confused looks, and handed one to Henry. "Come on. Let's get closer." They worked their way through the crowd, and Henry felt the walls closing in. This was a mistake. A colossal, relationship-ending mistake. He should abort, claim food poisoning, Get Clara out before someone recognized him. Then Victor's voice boomed through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. Tonight, we're finalizing a project that will transform Riverside into a state-of-the-art transit hub. Progress requires sacrifice, and sacrifice. Clara's voice cut through the room, loud enough to turn heads. You mean destroying a clinic that serves 3,000 people? The crowd went silent. Victor's eyes found them, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to place the waitress who'd just interrupted his speech. Henry's heart stopped. Clara stepped forward, tray forgotten. Riverside Community Clinic has been there for 30 years. You're not sacrificing anything, you're erasing people who don't fit your portfolio. Security, Victor said smoothly, but his eyes had moved past Clara now. To Henry. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. His cousin's face went from confusion to shock to something darker. Henry! Victor's voice dripped disbelief. Is that you? The room erupted in whispers. Clara turned to look at Henry, her expression puzzled. Who's Henry? Victor laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. You're kidding. You don't know. He gestured broadly to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears my dear cousin has been playing dress-up. Henry Sterling, everyone. Heir to Sterling Transit Holdings. Majority shareholder. The man who signs all our paychecks. He paused, savoring the moment. And apparently, the man currently pretending to be catering staff. Clara's face drained of color. She looked at Henry, really looked at him, and he watched understanding crash through her like a waveform. The watch. The vocabulary he sometimes slipped into. The way he'd known exactly which board meeting to disrupt. Clara, Henry started, reaching for her. She stepped back like he'd struck her. You're Henry Sterling? Her voice cracked on his name. This whole time. I can explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That every single moment was a joke to you? It wasn't a joke. It was never, but Clara was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the exit, and Henry stood frozen on the ballroom floor, caught between his two lives, belonging to neither. Victor's voice followed him. Well, this is awkward. Around them, cameras flashed, and Henry knew that by morning, his double life would be headlines. But all he could see was Clara's back as she disappeared through the doors, taking with her the only thing his money couldn't buy back, her trust. Henry didn't go back to his penthouse after the gala. He went to the depot, still wearing his fake server's uniform, and sat in bus 47 until dawn. The bus smelled like diesel and worn vinyl and honesty, the only honest thing left in his life. Marcus found him there at 6 in the morning, looking concerned in the way Marcus always looked when Henry did something the board would call erratic. Sir, the press is outside your building. Victor's threatening a lawsuit. The board wants an emergency meeting. Henry stared at the steering wheel, at the worn grip his hands had learned so well. Tell them I resign. You can't resign. You're the majority shareholder. Then tell them I'm taking a leave of absence. Indefinitely. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. This is about the nurse. Henry didn't answer. He didn't have to. For 3 days, Henry tried to see Clara. She wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't open her door, wouldn't respond to messages. On the 4th day, he stopped trying. Instead, he called his lawyers and started signing papers. The first document transferred his fleet of luxury cars, the Aston Martin, the Bentley, the Ferrari he'd driven maybe twice, to auction, with proceeds going to community health care. The second document restructured Sterling Transit Holdings into a public benefit corporation with an independent ethics board. The third dissolved his trust fund, redirecting the money into grants for neighborhood clinics across the city. His father called him insane. Victor called him a traitor. The board called for a psychiatric evaluation. Henry called it the first honest thing he'd done in months. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the gala, Henry drove bus 47 to the Riverside Depot for the last time. Not as an undercover billionaire. as an actual driver who'd filed actual paperwork and passed actual background checks. His first shift started at noon. He was early. Clara was waiting at the first stop. Henry's heart stopped when he saw her. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping. She looked beautiful. She looked at him like she was deciding something important. "Clara," he started, but she held up her hand. "I saw what you did. The cars, the company restructuring, the trust fund. It's all over the news. Billionaire heir gives away fortune." She paused. "They're calling you either a saint or insane." "Probably both." Henry gripped the steering wheel. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I lied to you about everything that mattered. I just needed you to know that this," he gestured at the bus, at himself, "this wasn't a lie. Everything else was." Clara climbed the steps slowly, like approaching something that might vanish. "Are you really driving this route now? Actually driving it?" "Yeah." $8.50 an hour, no trust fund safety net, no penthouse to go home to. "I sold it." He'd moved into a studio apartment in Riverside, the kind with radiator heat and shared laundry. His neighbors were louder than his thoughts. It was perfect. Just like that. "You gave up billions." "I gave up money." Henry met her eyes in the mirror. "I didn't give up the only thing I actually wanted." Clara's hands tightened on her bag. "You hurt me. You made me feel stupid for trusting you." "I know. And I'm not asking you to trust me again. I'm just asking for a chance to earn it. Really earn it this time. No secrets, no games, just what? Just us." Clara's voice cracked. "How do I know this isn't another performance? Another test?" Henry pulled something from his pocket and held it out. His Patek Philippe, the watch worth more than most. "Cars. This is the last thing I kept. The only thing. It was my father's gift, and I couldn't let it go." He paused. "I want you to have it." Clara stared at the watch. "Henry, I can't. Sell it. Give it away. Throw it in the river. I don't care." His voice was steady now. "I spent my whole life holding on to things that didn't matter because I was afraid of wanting something I couldn't buy. But I can't buy you, Clara. I can't purchase forgiveness or rent trust. I can only show up. Every day. On this bus. Being exactly who I am now. Someone who wants to matter to you without the money." Clara took the watch, her fingers brushing his. "This doesn't fix what you did." "I know. And I'm not promising anything. Not forgiveness, not trust, not us." "I know," Henry said again. "But if you're willing to give me a chance to be someone worth knowing, I'll be here. Same route, same bus, same stupid cheap tacos." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "You're really doing this? Driving the bus? Actually living on that salary? For as long as you'll let me prove I mean it." She studied him for a long moment, then took her usual seat behind him. "Okay. But I'm paying full fare. No more free rides because the system's glitchy." "Deal." Henry started the engine, and bus 47 coughed to life with its familiar dying animal sound. As he pulled into traffic, Clara spoke quietly. "For the record, I liked you better in the dirty cap anyway." Henry caught her reflection in the mirror and saw the smallest hint of that smile he'd fallen in love with. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was a beginning, the kind you couldn't buy, couldn't fake, and couldn't build on anything except showing up every single day and being exactly who you claimed to be. And as bus 47 rattled down Riverside Avenue toward whatever came next, Henry Sterling finally felt like he was driving toward something real. The auction happened on a Wednesday. Henry stood in the back of the lot and watched his Aston Martin sell for $200,000, his Bentley for $350,000, his Ferrari for $500,000. Cars he'd barely driven, machines that had spent more time in climate-controlled garages than on actual roads. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the crowd. "All proceeds benefit the Community Health Care Alliance." People applauded. Henry felt nothing except relief. By Thursday morning, the fleet was gone. 8 luxury vehicles converted into funding for medical equipment, staff salaries, patient care. Marcus had the paperwork ready when Henry arrived at the depot, looking grim. The board is in chaos. Victor's circulating a petition to have you removed. Your father wants to talk. Henry signed the final transfer documents without reading them. Tell them I'm unavailable. And where will you be, sir? Henry grabbed the keys to bus 47 from the pegboard. Driving. The old bus coughed to life like it always did, reluctant but reliable. Henry drove Route 12 one more time, but not for passengers. He drove it to say goodbye. Every stop held a memory now. The corner where Clara first smiled at him, the intersection where she defended him against the college kids, the taco truck where they'd shared $4 dinners that meant more than $1,000 meals. He'd spent months pretending to be poor and discovered he'd been emotionally bankrupt his entire life. The clinic appeared ahead, its sign freshly painted, flowers blooming in planters that hadn't existed months ago. His money had done that. But his lies had nearly destroyed it all anyway. Henry parked bus 47 in front and killed the engine. Then he waited. Clara emerged 40 minutes later, stopping short when she saw him. And the bus. She approached slowly, her face unreadable, and climbed aboard without being asked. What are you doing here, Henry? Her voice was careful, guarded. I gave away the cars. All of them. Auction finished yesterday. I saw the news. Clara stayed standing in the aisle, maintaining distance. Very dramatic. The billionaire renounces his wealth. That's a good story. It's not a story. It's the truth. Henry stood, moving closer but not touching. I restructured the company, dissolved my trust fund, moved into a studio apartment in Riverside. I'm not playing anymore, Clara. This is my life now. Until you get bored. Until the novelty wears off and you remember you actually like having money. I do like having money, Henry said honestly. But I love you more. And I'd rather drive this bus for the rest of my life than spend another day pretending to be someone I'm not. Clara's eyes shimmered. You lied to me for months. I did. You let me worry about you, defend you, feel sorry for you. I know. You made me fall in love with someone who didn't exist. Her voice cracked on the words, and Henry's chest constricted. He did exist, Henry said quietly. The man you fell for, he was real. Everything else was the lie. The penthouses, the galas, the board meetings. That was the performance I'd been giving my whole life. But here, he gestured at the bus. With you. That was the first time I'd ever been myself. Clara wiped her eyes roughly. How do I trust that? You don't. Not yet. Henry pulled something from his pocket, a laminated card he'd made at a print shop that morning. But maybe you'll trust this. She took it, her hands trembling. It was a bus pass, custom printed with her name. At the top, lifetime pass, valid for Route 12 and one future built on total honesty. No expiration date. No fine print. Just a promise in laminated plastic. This is the corniest thing I've ever seen, Clara said, but she was almost smiling. Almost. I know. But it's real. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I'm just asking for a chance to spend every single day proving that the man you fell for is the man I want to be. Henry paused. No more secrets. No more games. Just me showing up, driving this route, being exactly who I said I was. For as long as it takes for you to believe me. Clara studied the pass, her thumb running over the laminated edge. What if it takes years? Then I'll drive for years. What if I never forgive you? Then at least I'll have spent that time being someone worth forgiving. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they'd built and everything he'd broken. Finally, Clara folded the pass and slipped it into her pocket. I'm not ready to say yes. But I'm not ready to say goodbye either. Henry's breath released in a rush. That's enough. That's more than enough. I mean it, Henry. One lie, one secret, one moment where I think you're playing games again. There won't be. I swear on this bus, on this route, on every mile I've driven trying to figure out who I actually am. No more lies. Clara nodded slowly, then moved toward the door. At the steps, she paused and looked back. Same time tomorrow? My shift ends at 6:15. I'll be here. You better be. She stepped off, and Henry watched her walk back into the clinic, the building his money had saved, but his honesty might still win back. He sat in the driver's seat of Bus 47, feeling its worn grip under his hands, and started the engine. Tomorrow, he'd wake up in a studio apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors. He'd drink cheap coffee. He'd drive Route 12 for $8.50 an hour. He'd take Clara home if she'd let him, and if she wouldn't, he'd wait until she did. No mansion at the end of this road. No fortune. Just the long, honest work of becoming someone worthy of the woman who'd taught him the difference between being rich and being real. Henry Sterling pulled away from Riverside Community Clinic and drove toward whatever came next, finally heading in the right direction. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. Hit the subscribe button as I will be bringing more interesting stories. Turn on your notification because you would not want to miss my story for anything.